Well, hello again. Back again with another video. Thought you'd like to see the progress. As you can see, the house has grown considerably. We've got a roof, we've got trimming all the way around the roof. It's looking pretty sweet, if I do say so myself. But that's not actually what I wanted to talk about today. The other thing I haven't shown you yet is the inventory system, which is now working. I've decided the character will start off with a phone. So when you push I for inventory, you get that. Now, I'm going to build a system in where if you click on the phone, it becomes a fully interactable object that will have, you'll get messages from people, be able to read texts, listen to voice notes, etc., that will drive the story forward, which is why I've done that. And if we go inside, and just will switch a light on and pick up the flashlight, there's now a feedback system that tells you you just picked something up, and when you look in your inventory, you can see the flashlight has now been added. So that's all new. I'll go through the code for that in a few days, but I wanted to start talking about the interact system today because it's quite complicated and there's a lot to go through. So to start with, we have this blueprint here. This is called Interactive Object Base. Now what this is a parent blueprint for every interactable object in the game. And the reason we have this the reason they call it a parent blueprint is because all its children, in other words, copies that you make of it, well, not copies per se, because you can duplicate it, but you can also, there's a function called create child, which if I find it, let me just do that quickly. If I find it in here and right-click on it, you'll see you get the option duplicate, or you get create child blueprint class. So every interactable object in the game is a child of this. Now that just means that everything that's in this, the parent blueprint, gets inherited. So we have this little bit of code that runs in this blueprint. That means that it then runs in every single child of the blueprint as well, which makes it a lot easier because you don't have to copy paste a bunch of code into every single blueprint because it's already there in the parent. So what this bit of code does is, firstly, it creates a reference to the player and saves it as a variable. The reason we do this is so that we can refer to the player blueprint from other places without doing a cast. Now I'll explain the difference and what a cast is later. And then we do the same thing for these two widgets here, notify and feedback. If I have to go into here and show you, you'll see there are essentially four widgets at play here. You have notify, feedback, inventory, and inventory item. Now, inventory and inventory item I'll cover in detail when we get to the actual inventory system. But yeah, for now, what you need to know is this bit of code is just making it easier for all of these children blueprints, like any interactable object, to talk to these other blueprints, the player blueprint and these notify widgets. So basically, what I'm going to show you today is the code that makes this happen. You walk up to an object and it says open door. You walk away and that vanishes. So there's actually a lot going on here just to make that happen. If we open up here, you'll see we start with something called on component begin overlap. So what does that mean? Well, if I open the viewport here of the door, you'll see there's this red sphere thing. That is essentially a collision box. What the game is doing is waiting for the player to overlap it. And the game knows the player has overlapped that because the player has a similar collision box around it as well. Now, in my case, the player is invisible because it's a first-person game, and I didn't want to be messing around with 3D models for my very first game because it's insanely complicated. But if this was a third-person game, for instance, there'd be an actual player animated model standing inside this collision box. But all that's happening here is when this invisible capsule overlaps this invisible sphere, this event gets triggered. You'll see the text is in red and it's got that little icon, means it's an event. The game is waiting for this to happen. So when it does happen, we cast to BP player. Now, this is how blueprints talk to each other. What we're doing is we are essentially talking to the player blueprint. Now, you might remember we already created a reference here. So why are we casting again? We created a reference in the interactive object base, but in the front door, which is a child, the front door blueprint, which is a child of the interactive object base, we're still doing a cast. And the reason for that is we need to check whether the thing that is overlapping this sphere is in fact the player's sphere. And the only way to do that is to do a cast. And the reason for that is, I'll show you. If I had to drag in this variable here, player, this is what we created earlier in the interactive object base. So if I drag this in, I can run anything that comes out of here. This player essentially replaces the as BP player pin over there. But you'll notice we need to connect to this node from this side as well, which is why we have to do a cast specifically for that. And the reason we need to connect from this side as well is we need to tell the door that is in fact the player that is overlapping with it. Confused yet? Yeah, no, it gets worse. Okay, the next thing we do is we set a variable called can interact to positive, and we'll get to that in a future video. But essentially, this variable can interact lives here in the player blueprint. So we're using the cast to BP player to change that variable as well. It's a Boolean. We spoke about those in a previous video, so we're setting it to positive. The next thing we're doing is we're setting something called received message in WBP notify, which is our widget blueprint. So let's go and have a look there. Now you'll see here it says received message. This is essentially just placeholder text that is being replaced by the contents of this variable, interact message. Now, where does this variable come from? Again, from interactive object base. All of this stuff is done ahead of time so that every single interactable object has this variable in it. You'll see another one called feedback message, which works with the feedback system, which is a topic for another video. So we're setting this interact message inside WBP notify. What are we setting it to? We're setting it to say open door. The way that works is inside here, you'll see we've got this text that says received message. If we look over here, get interactive object message. That's the name of a function that we've bound to this text. And what it does is essentially it just waits for that variable over there to be set with whatever's in the interact message. And that's what this set function is doing. Next thing we do, the next thing we do is add to viewport. Add to viewport is essentially adding the text. Let me just go back to designer. The text that is in this box. Notice the text has suddenly disappeared. Reason for that is, if I had to play again from here, you'll notice the text doesn't just appear, it fades in and it fades out. So what's actually happening here is we are adding that widget to the viewport, and then we're playing the animation called interact text fade in, which if we go back here and I click on animations, there it is, interact text fade in. And what does this do? It makes the text fade in. Except by now, we've already replaced the text that says received messenger with the contents of the variable inside front door, the front door blueprint, the interact message that says open door. So instead of saying received message, this text will say open door at this point. And then we play the animation, which is what this box over here does. And that's it. That's all that's happening there to get that to happen. One thing I do want to say about this, if you've ever done any video editing at all, this is going to look very familiar to you. This uses a process called interpolation. I think in video editing they call it keyframe interpolation. So you'll create a keyframe. What I'm working with here is the alpha channel of the text color and the alpha channel of the shadow color. If you remember in a previous video, we spoke about alpha channels that handles transparency of whatever color you're working with. In this case, it's white text and a black shadow. And we've got the alpha in both cases set to 0 on these keyframes and 1 on these keyframes. And over half a second, that animation plays back and the text fades in. So that's how the text fades in, and it's very, very similar to how it fades out. You'll see now we have an event called on-component end overlap, and all that means is at the point where the player's collision box and the door's collision sphere stop overlapping, then the series of events is triggered. Again, we do a cast to BP player to make sure it's the player. I'm not sure if I explained this clearly enough. The reason we have to check to see if it's the player is in a lot of games you'll have NPCs or enemies wandering around, and if one of them happens to walk through a collision box, you don't want open door suddenly appearing on your screen. You want to make sure it's only your character that can trigger the text, which is why we do that. And then the rest of it, we essentially just do the same thing in reverse. We get a reference to the notify widget, and this time we get a reference to interact text fade out, which if I go in here, you will see is also an animation. We have one to fade the text in and one to fade the text out. If I had to play this back. Now, you'll notice that if I go back here, there is actually an option to play animations in reverse. And I've tried this rather than make 2 separate animations, but it tends to be buggy. It usually bugs out, and I found it's actually easier to just make 2 separate animations, one to fade in and one to fade out. After we play the animation, now notice initially we had to add to viewport. Now, because we've done that already, the text is, the widget is already added to viewport. So all we do now is we play the animation that fades the text back out. Then we delay. This is a delay node, and this is a get end time node. Now, why would we stick a delay over here? Well, the reason for that I can show you if I had to close these connections and bypass the delay node, compile and save, and if I had to hit play from here, you'll see the text fades in, but now it doesn't fade out, it just disappears. Why would it do that? Well, it's actually like quite intuitive if you, I just closed that window by accident. Wow, that was genius of me. Sorry, give me 1 second. What did I close? It was the front door blueprint. Where is it? There. The reason we have to do the delay is because we're playing the animation, and then the node after the delay is remove from parent. A remove from parent is pretty much the opposite of add to viewport. And if we play animation and then remove from parent, the animation doesn't have time to finish playing. Remember, the animation is half a second long. So if we just remove from parent, it starts playing the animation and then immediately removes the widget before the animation is finished playing. So what we do is we use this node to talk to the reference to the animation, get the end time of the animation. So we have to, I mean, I could just essentially put half a second in 0.5, but this makes it all nice and neat and tidy and satisfying. And yeah, we delay the code execution for that amount of time, for the amount of time for the animation to play. Then we remove from parent. And finally, we set can interact to off. And all of that code does this. Makes open door appear and makes open door disappear. But because we're using variables to replace the text, it also makes turn light on and turn light off appear. it changes open door to closed door. Let me just show you that as well, because I didn't actually. Or is that going to be? Oh no, that's going to be in the next. But that'll be in the next video. I'll explain that. I'm obviously getting ahead of myself here. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how that little bit of code works. The same process essentially is used. Sorry, I've got to just get in the building again. The same process makes take flashlight appear. Any text that appears at the top of the screen is part of the feedback widget, which is something we'll get to later. And how long have I been talking? Oh my God, this video is long enough already. Okay, in the next video, we'll talk about the actual interaction, and if there's time, the feedback system, and the inventory will probably be in a later video. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.